And joining us now, Boris Brott, Maestro, Conductor, Music Director. Well, we're going to get to your CV as we go along. Welcome, Boris.
Thank you. Great pleasure to be here. I'm a great admirer of yours, even though I've known you since you were very, very small.
You have. That is quite true. We Hamiltonians. Let's just start by establishing a bit about your background. Who is Alexander Brott?
Alexander Brott was my father. He was a violinist, composer, conductor, and every time I say the word was, it gives me a little stoch, as they say in Yiddish, because he died 5 years ago. We were extremely close in the last 7 years after my mother passed away. An extraordinary man, intelligent, bright, very creative, and a person who inspired me greatly.
And your mother?
My mother, likewise, but from a completely different perspective. A survivor of the Nazi Holocaust, came to Canada. Also a very fascinating story, but a person with a background in business that really helped my dad eventually establish the McGill Chamber Orchestra, of which I'm music director, some 71 years later.
I'm going to get to that. Your mother played the cello?
My mother played the cello in the Montreal Symphony, on the first desk of the Montreal Symphony, until compulsory retirement at the age of 65 in those days. Likewise ran the McGill Chamber Orchestra from a financial standpoint, was one of the first people to bring sponsorship, commercial sponsorship, to Canadian orchestras.
And Brother Dennis?
And Brother Dennis is a phenomenal cellist and runs the music festival, Chamber Music Festival in Montreal. Is professor of chamber music and cello at the Conservatoire.
So would I be going out on a limb here to say that music is the family business?
No. No, of course it has been. It has been the family business, the family... the soul of the family, I think, is the right way to say it.
You are the conductor and music director of the New West Symphony in California.
That's right,
in
Los Angeles. The New West Symphony is an organization that is comprised of musicians who are predominantly in the film business. Most of the film scores that you hear that are scored in Hollywood are scored with our musicians. And it's not a full-time orchestra in the sense of the Montreal Symphony, but is one of extremely high caliber because all of these players are, very highly skilled.
And you're still going to Montreal for the McGill Chamber.
And I'm still going to Montreal for the McGill Chamber, and I run something called the National Academy Orchestra.
That's next on my list here, Boris.
All right,
wait for it.
All right.
National Academy Orchestra of Canada is?
National Academy Orchestra of Canada is Canada's professional training program for young musicians, graduates of music programs all over the world, whose SIN happens to be original. That is, their SIN number is Canadian. And we've placed over 1,300 musicians in positions all over the world in the last 22 years.
Principal Youth and Family Conductor of the National Arts Centre of Canada?
That's correct.
What's that?
Well, I have a great love for creating children's concerts that I think I inherited from my mentor, Leonard Bernstein. I was his assistant for the last 2 years. He was with the New York Philharmonic and experienced firsthand those phenomenal concerts for young people. And I've been developing scripts and producing them and creating them for the National Arts Centre, the Toronto Symphony, and orchestras all over North America.
Artistic Director of the Brott Musical Festivals. What's that?
Well, Brott Music Festivals is the home of the National Academy Orchestra. It's Canada's largest orchestral music festival. It goes some 16 weeks, and it is really the kind of crucible into which the National Academy functions.
Is there a type of music that runs across all of this?
Well, I would say classical music predominantly, but also jazz. We're open to all kinds of creativity. I think there is no such thing as good. Well, there is only good and bad music. There is not all of the disciplines really are come one into the other if one is open to their influences.
So here's a guy who makes his living in California and Quebec and Ontario and travels around the world, and you live in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada.
Best place in the world to live.
Why do you still live in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada?
Well, it's a wonderful town to live in. I mean, it's a small town in many ways, and it's a big city in others. You know your grocer, you know the people who supply you with everything that you need to live, and you're only 45 minutes, thanks to the HOV, from Toronto International Airport, where you can fly direct to literally anywhere.
And you were the conductor, of course, of the Hamilton Philharmonic Orchestra.
For some 23 years.
23 years.
Of which your mother was the president.
And my father, but that's another story.
That's right, they're both.
He before she.
That's correct.
One of the reasons I wanted to get you in here today was having now established that you know a little something about music.
Yes.
When we go to concerts, we see the guy in the tux and tails up at the front with the baton doing his thing. And I don't think anybody's under the assumption that all he does is wave that thing and keep the orchestra in time for 2 hours at a concert. I mean, we know there's way more that goes into it than that. So that's what I want to find out about. Take us through this. Where does the conductor's job start?
Well, I think that the conductor's job starts certainly as a music director in the creation of programs and in the act of creativity, because there's a lot of creativity that goes into running an orchestra. You'll remember back in the day when we created those ensembles, which included the Canadian brass. It was a new way of thinking about the development of an orchestra in chamber ensembles. So there's a lot of creativity that goes into the direction of an orchestra that is not, that results back on the stage, but in so many different ways, not just simply the serious concerts that you watch and go to, but children's concerts, programs for people who are older aged, programs of jazz, programs of crossover music, programs of contemporary music.
Pieces?
Yes, often you do, but it's usually a collaborative venture between yourself and members of a lay board. And therein lies a whole bunch of problems we might get into.
Because they want to play Beethoven all the time and you want to do something a little...
No, actually can go the other way, that they want to do a lot of sort of racy contemporary stuff, and you have to be concerned with the bottom line, that is filling those seats. And to a large extent, audiences for classical music are very conservative.
Do you hire the players?
Again, it's a marriage, and has become much more so as the unions, the musicians' unions, have really, in lieu of being paid lots of money, they have taken over control of a lot of the artistic aspects of the orchestra, and that can be good, but can also be very dangerous.
Meaning they get a say in who gets hired?
They get a say in who gets hired, who gets what gets played, who gets hired to conduct. You know, there's always action and reaction, and I think perhaps reaction can sometimes be too strong.
When you're conducting in your rehearsals, do you tell them how to play it?
Yes, much the same way as a director of a play, for example, will organize the way in which actors perform Shakespeare. They're not going to change the words Shakespeare wrote, but they give impetus to those words. They're creative in the sense of making those words come alive. Music as a language is a very complex and at the same time simple language. And creativity in music is a two-stage process. The composer writes the note, but those notes are simply black dots on paper until someone brings them to life, and that's where the performer comes in.
So I'm going to guess you've conducted, Beethoven's Fifth lots of times.
Lots of times.
And does it work like this, where you say to the first violinist, I need more oomph on that bum-pa-pa-pa?
Could be. Could be.
What kind of a direction would you give to a player, for example?
Well, I mean, you could say, look, this has to have a tremendous amount of energy because they're the most famous notes in music that they have to be played as if they're the last notes you're ever going to hear. In many ways, it's creating simile, dramatic simile, both from a tender point of view as well as from a strong point of view, to actually make those notes come to life. Because our orchestras, to a large extent in North America, for example, are older, and they've come to look at it as a job. And yet we play music, we don't work music, and it is inspiring them to be consistently creative in the sense that they are bringing this to life, that it has energy, that it talks to people across the gulf of the proscenium arch of a concert stage. So it's making that music really come to life and making it sort of land in your lap as an audience, not allowing you to possibly fall asleep.
In sports, if there's a disagreement between the coach and his team, the old expression is you can't fire 20 players, you got to fire the coach. Does it work that way in music?
Regrettably, that often does. This is a bone of contention among conductors of our particular generation. One of the dangers of music of today, in orchestral sense, is that it's become homogeneous. That there is no difference between any orchestra in North America, for example. And that's one of the reasons I like Europe and one of the reasons I like working with young people, because they have that enthusiasm and they are prepared to accept those differences. I can still remember when you could listen to 10 bars of a Beethoven symphony, of that same Beethoven Fifth Symphony, played by the New York Philharmonic, the Philadelphia Orchestra, the Chicago Symphony, and the Cleveland Orchestra, and they'd all sound different.
And you could tell which was which?
Oh, yes. Markedly different.
What would be different?
Well, for example, the strings of the Philadelphia Orchestra had that lush sheen. The brass of the Chicago was very special, and they had that energy and that incisiveness. Each orchestra had a different characteristic given to it by its maestro. who created, by choosing the players, created that team and the differences between those teams. Today's you have musicians to a large extent who democratically in one way or another, and some of that democracy has resulted in many ways in kind of awkward situations. For example, musicians are chosen often behind a screen. Now, you wouldn't choose a cleaning lady without knowing their references, but we often choose musicians
So you
that
can't
way.
favor someone that you might know.
So you can't favor as to sex. You can't favor as to race, religion, or creed. The object was purity and openness, but the result in the end works often against the more experienced player, who's not used to playing behind a screen, who's used to playing in an ensemble. And the one thing you can't test in the audition process is how do they play together.
I'm going to do another analogy here for film directors or sports coaches, because they may be examples that people are more familiar with. But there are coaches, particularly in sports, who want to motivate to get the best performance out of their athletes by scaring the hell out of them, getting in their face, that kind of thing. And there are directors who try to make their leading ladies cry because they think they're going to get. How does a conductor do it?
I personally believe in positive reinforcement. I do not believe in an aggressive approach. I don't think that those things work in today's society, in our egalitarian world. I think they do the opposite. I think if you can enthuse the players with your enthusiasm for what you're doing, you can do far more by saying, that was fantastic. Now, can we apply that same energy or that same tenderness or that same approach to the next passage? In many ways, I've experimented with rehearsing and never saying a negative word at all, only talking about what was good. And it works a lot better than what was negative.
Who out there has a reputation for being intimidating and getting in the face of players to get a better performance out of them?
I can't think of anyone anymore. There used to be, it was the old school. And the Toscaninis of this world who had a reputation. You can watch them on film, screaming at the musicians and saying shoemaker, et cetera, and castigating. Sometimes it worked really well. But I think in today's world it does not work any well, any longer.
Does the conductor want to be liked by his players?
That's a difficulty. I think one, as a human being, likes to be liked, regardless of where you are and regardless of what you do. Sometimes you have to make decisions that are not popular, and that puts you in a position of being suspect. Also, I think often there is a kind of, as you mentioned, the whole business of 20 players and the one coach, that there is, in a way, a kind of almost impossible role that the conductor has to play coming into a new ensemble, where there's an instant honeymoon, and then, of course, an equally opposite reaction, which happens very quickly, where the person all of a sudden on whom you're depending for leadership, disappoints in one way or another. So we are experiencing in this field a lot of a kind of round robin of changing positions, and I don't believe it's healthy.
Is it always?
I'm for long-term relationships. I believe that's the only way you can create anything of any lasting value, much in the same way as human relationships. I mean, I'm in a marriage for 34 years, and I intend to be that way for the rest of my life. And I think that the interchange, the day-to-day interchange, makes for a stronger family relationship.
Is it always the case that the conductor knows how to play an instrument?
Always.
Always the case.
Always
and
the case.
Maybe
Not well, but or certainly as they progress and do more and more conducting and less playing, probably certainly not well. Okay. But I was a violinist and a horn player when I got into conducting, and I think every conductor has to have a more than a passing knowledge and an ability to play an instrument well.
And how much of the conductor's job is strictly on the music, and how much is administration, promotion, sucking up to sponsors, dealing with the board, all of that stuff?
Regrettably, about 80-20. 20% on the music, 80% on everything else.
No kidding. I thought you meant the other way around.
No.
20% on the music?
That's correct. Unfortunately.
Why is it that way?
Well, because of the necessity of keeping orchestras alive, which is complex. In the United States, for example, there's very little government funding. So it's almost entirely the matter of raising money, and you have to be nice to people, have lunches, go out. You have to deal with personnel problems in orchestras. A lot of the time, you're on the phone. And a lot of the time, you're face-to-face with people who allow you to live. In Canada, it's less so. In Europe, even less so.
Explain that to me, because there was an article in the paper recently, again, about how the Toronto Symphony, despite being one of the great orchestras, I think, is in financial trouble again. I mean, how does this happen all the time?
Because it's an impossible financial equation. The number of people performing on a stage in comparison with the number of people listening, the equation simply doesn't work.
The hall's always full.
That doesn't matter, because if you filled the hall, you'd have to charge 3 times as much money as people are prepared to pay in order to make the balance equal, let alone profitable. It's never been a profitable equation. It's simply not fungible. It's art, and therefore not always fungible, not always commercially viable. In fact, the symphony orchestra is completely unviable commercially.
One last question. The best concert you ever conducted, and why?
My goodness. All right, I'm going to choose the concert that I gave in the year 2000 for the Pope, and it was John Paul II. It was at the Alla Nervi, which is on the left-hand side of St. Peter's. It was the realization of a dream of Leonard Bernstein, who was my mentor, that his Mass, which was very controversial, at the time it was written in the 70s, early 70s, for the opening of the Kennedy Center. It was outlawed by the Catholic Church, and here I was conducting this in the center of Catholicism, a nice Jewish boy, conducting Leonard Bernstein's Mass. It was completely a most wonderful experience, meeting the Pope, doing it in that circumstance, fulfilling my mentor's dream. My dad, who was at that point 85, was there. My whole family. It was a very special, perhaps the most special moment of my life musically.
Maestro, this was a pretty wonderful moment for me too. Thanks a
you.
lot for doing this.
My pleasure.
Boris Brott, maestro, conductor, music director. Great to have you here in TVO tonight.
My pleasure.